Today on Amaranth Bay, we're going to finish off the east end of downtown by detailing this area along the waterfront, including a system of parks and a truly awful interchange, which is where we're going to start. We'll begin by clearing out some space here because even though I am going for a more compact interchange, it definitely would have been a bit tight of a fit here given the pre-existing space between the grid and the track. In the case of the grid, that would have been adjusted when they built the interchange originally along with this stretch of freeway. So they ripped up the original length of road here and jogged the frontage road over half a block into this kind of alley lane, or what would have originally been an alley lane, and that'll allow for a more reasonably sized interchange and a more reasonably spaced traffic light. Even after doing this though, there's still not quite enough space here for the inner on-ramp. So I took the whole interchange assembly and rotated and shifted it out here to give it just enough space to fit up against the frontage road. Doing this is also going to align the whole thing with the angle of the shoreline as it angles out here, and I think that just looks more satisfying. So with the two ramps on this side, I was apparently so excited to build them that I forgot to hit record. So here's how they look, at least in this first pass. We're going to make some more adjustments to make them look better in a minute. But first, with the basic build of the interchange done, I wanted to extend the freeway out so that we can get some traffic running along here to see how it looks while it's actually functional. In Duluth, the equivalent freeway terminates and turns into a surface street just northeast of where we're working. I believe that the original plan was to have it run further north, so I wanted to bring that forgotten dream to life by laying down 4 glorious lanes of asphalt along the pristine Lake Superior waterfront, all the way up to our best friends in the north. Since most of the freeway is never going to be seen, we're not going to spend any time detailing this today. I mostly just wanted the route laid out so that we can generate some traffic, and I also think that it's going to look kind of cool to have the highway winding off into the distance away from the city in the background. All of this stuff that's shrouded in fog at the edge of the map is just something I like to do in my cities where I have some train station buildings plopped down, and that allows me to create train lines in and out of the city, which gives me more control over the rail traffic. There are also some surface roads there in case I ever want to add in some houses to simulate suburban populations that are far enough away from the city that they don't actually fit onto the map, but close enough that you would get some traffic back and forth between them and the city proper. If I do that in the future, it also allows me to artificially inflate the city's population, which is always a fun option to have available. You always get ugly blank nodes when making interchanges in this game, so I'm going to use these presets that I made a long time ago, which definitely aren't perfect, but they at least get the job done to fill in these nodes. I switched it up a little bit by adding this exit-only lane for northbound traffic. I like to do this by adding a short stretch of 3-lane highway that transitions between the 2-lane freeway to the longer 3-lane section, and then I mark it with IMT, and then I use the IMT lines as a reference while I smush it around with Move It and Node Controller, and that way I can see whether or not the transition looks realistic. The ramp adjustments are going to be affected by both the space available and of course the routes that people are taking through the interchange. Because this is kind of a weird diamond interchange that is also a dead-end road, the traffic pattern is a little different than usual. So people exiting on the city side will take this ramp on an embankment that curves over toward the city because they're not going to have to turn left. And of course, people entering the freeway from the city side will take a ramp that's a mirror image of this. Then on the other side of the interchange, the ramps are limited to a very tight space between the highway and the rail track, so they're going to be squeezed in as tightly as possible. And instead of embankments, we're going to put them up on custom pillars in a little bit. For the bridge part of the interchange, along with the intersections as well, I decided to use these curbless road assets by Nane New to allow for much more precise detailing. I like these because they don't have any baked-in bridge geometry if you use them as an elevated road, or ugly baked-in terrain if you use them as a surface road. Of course, the corollary here is that you have to do a lot of detailing to make them look good, but I guess that's probably why most of you are here, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm starting out with IMT to add an edge to them using these grass networks, but that still leaves this nice lumpy bit over here, so I'm going to have to manually drag in a retaining wall to make the abutment beneath the overpass, and then behind that I'm going to drag in a grass network at the same level to make the embankment. For the bridge itself, I'm using IMT once again, this time adding in concrete barriers to match the ones on the ramp. But due to the width of the shoulder on the ramp, the pre-existing barrier is kind of set back away from the road, which means I had to shift out the barriers on the overpass back. But to fix that, I just used this curb network to make a little paved shoulder. The pillars over here are pretty straightforward. I'm just using these classic expressway pillar props by Ronix, which by the way are almost a decade old and are still some of the best props on the workshop, in my opinion. The last little bit of landscaping here is just this retaining wall that separates the frontage road from the ramp and the embankment. And then finally, I'm going to even out this lumpy embankment using a terraforming road. Before getting to detailing the road surfaces, I had to plot out the paths that vehicles would take through the interchange. I had intentionally used a 4-lane version of the curbless road for the overpass to allow for more detailing space. So I'm going to ban vehicles from the inner lanes and then go ahead and use that to make a nice fat median in the center. Using IMT, of course. I feel like I missed something when I tried to figure out how to fill in these triangular bits between the slip lanes and the overpass, but I really couldn't get them to look nice and sharp with IMT, so I ended up just using these pavement props turned into POs so that I could get the angular look that I was going for. It's not quite as precise as if I could have made it work in IMT, but I learned long ago that sometimes when you're playing this game, it's better just to do something quick and dirty and move on rather than get stuck trying to fix the same thing over and over again until you get sick of the game and stop making videos for months or even years at a time and give up on your YouTube channel, theoretically speaking, of course. At some point here, I realized that I had forgotten to make a through lane for people who want to return to the freeway, so I had to add that in by using a bunch of intersecting lines in IMT to make an empty space in the middle. And this is probably the most pointless thing that I've ever made in this game, because no one is actually ever going to accidentally get off the freeway and need to use this, and if people did start using it, I would immediately ban them from using it, because I don't actually want people to drive through there. I want them to stay on the freeway if they're going to be on the freeway. But I do feel like it adds a bit of realism to the interchange to have it here. With all the detailing done on the interchange, I wanted to move on from this area for now. We'll come back to it later to develop the surrounding neighborhood toward the end of the video, but before that we're going to move on to the next phase of the waterfront build, which is the park system that I mentioned before. In Duluth, they have Leif Erikson Park right on the waterfront along the Lake Walk Trail, and then there's a cool rose garden up top on one of the freeway caps. I wanted to take inspiration from these, of course making some adjustments to fit the different context here, including the placement of the freeway and the caps that we built back in episode 10, which are just a little bit different than the ones in real life. I wanted to start off the build with one of the coolest features from the inspiration, which is a small pedestrian bridge that crosses over the tracks from the cap park to meet the lake walk. I'm using the same bridge asset that I used a couple episodes back in the big park build, this time squeezing it down until it's the width of this pedestrian path, which I'm going to then run over the tracks and connect the Lake Walk Trail. Because of the big elevation change, it was necessary to either build a staircase to go down to the ground level or to slope up the trail on an embankment. I chose the latter option because first I thought it would just look kind of cool, and second, the equivalent shoreline in Duluth does seem to slope up a bit, almost into a kind of a cliff-like structure, so I think that that's going to work nicely in mirroring real life. I was kind of tired of using vertical retaining walls in this vicinity, so I decided to make a sloped one using this stone wall key asset, which I think has a really nice look to it and a nice sharp slope to it without looking vertical. Although it is very, very thick, so a bit of node controller is needed to squeeze it down to size to fit the path here. The focal point of Leif Erikson Park seems to be this stage that overlooks Lake Superior, which is kind of a cool feature. And it's flanked by these two little turret shelters, I guess, which seems to be something that's not really uncommon at the various parks in Duluth. So I wanted to make sure to include that here. I'm going to use these castle turrets by Jas, which I will link down in the description along with any other assets that I've mentioned, and squish them around a bit in PO to get the proportions right so that they fit the context a little bit better. I have to say that downloading a pack of castle assets really made me want to build a city with a castle in it, so maybe we'll do that someday, but today's not that day. I tried making a rounded stage a few different ways and eventually settled on making this semicircle shape with a plain road and then adding a filler with the texture that I wanted. Of course, that leaves this empty spot in the middle, but trust me, I tried all kinds of ways to fill that in with both decals and IMT to match the filler, and it just didn't work. So instead of fretting about that, I just made it look intentional by plopping down this prop and converting it to a semicircular shape as well by merging half of the vertices together in PO. For the surroundings of the park and the rest of the shoreline as a whole, I needed to shape the terrain just a little bit so that we can still have this almost cliff-like rise coming up from the lake, but also a bit of flat shoreline along the base. And then to emphasize the change in slope, I used my theme's oil texture to add a rocky look to the shoreline. I also plopped down a line of grass to get a bit of stubble that's also going to help define that. The grass isn't going to be super visible, but I think that it helps to have a bit of underbrush coming out from under the trees, just in case you do catch a glimpse of it. Looks a bit more realistic, I guess. So as to not block the view of the lake from people visiting the park, which is kind of one of the main reasons to come here in the first place, I left this big gap in the trees, and I'm going to outline some paths as well to represent that people will often come here and clamber down to the shoreline. Because of course, why would you not do that if you come to this park? That would be kind of fun, I think. At some point later, I also realized that it was silly to have trees blocking the stage, so I came back off camera and cleared out a line of sight down to the lake. The interior of the park is going to remain as this nice, clear, usable lawn space, just like in Duluth. And then beyond that, it really just needs a few of the usual park paraphernalia, which will be a breeze thanks to Intersection Marking Tool, which is a good mod that you should download if you haven't yet. Do it. As usual with my choices in life, practicality was more of an afterthought than anything, so I'm just going to sneak in these Park Life compatible entertainment blocks to draw people to the park. And while I was in Park Life mode, I also decided to name the park from a few episodes back, which I decided to call Rock Creek Park, as a couple people had suggested. So I guess you probably won't want to go there after dark. Or maybe you will. I'm not here to judge. These two freeway caps have been sitting blank for long enough, given that we made them like 17 episodes ago, which in the world of my channel is like 2 years or something like that. And today is finally the day that we're going to take care of them. We're going to start with this one that is the same one we just connected to the lake walk via the footbridge. And this is going to be our version of the Duluth Rose Garden. That connection is mostly going to be evoked by this pattern of round enclosures. The ones in Duluth get progressively larger as you go through the park, but I wanted to keep it a bit simpler and keep them all the same size. A lot of the other details are going to remain the same though. So to start, we have these rounded hedges forming the enclosures around the brick pieces. I'm using this like arched hedge prop and rotating it in PO so that it's on the ground, and then just kind of roughly forming it up to the shape of the brick surface. There's also this bigger one to the side that has some trees inside it, kind of in contrast to the other ones. I can't say the hedge looks great morphed to this shape and size, so maybe I'll have to come back later and replace that with some more normal hedges. I think I could probably use some short sections of straight hedges to mimic that curve and have it look a little bit better. But anyway, there are also these little tree planters to add in just a bit more verticality. And then in addition to those, surrounding the enclosures and kind of mirroring the curve of the brick pieces are the flower beds that give this park its name and its purpose. A bit of a pointless side note here, but I decided to have this be an orchid garden instead of a rose garden. I honestly don't know if you could even find an outdoor orchid garden in this kind of context in this part of the world, or if anyone would even be interested in seeing it compared to a rose garden, but I thought it sounded cool. The garden has a couple of focal points, with the first being this fountain, which I'm happy to say has built-in animations, which always looks nice in a fountain. The second is going to be contained in this little nubbin over to the side, which consists of this square area of path. There was a painful lack of statues of historical Viking figures on the workshop, so I decided to pivot away from the Nordic ancestry theme that you get in the Duluth Park with Leif Erikson, and this one is going to reference my man, Johannes Gutenberg. So I just got to fence it off to keep the technophobes away, and then I'm going to finish up the park with a couple more details. So we have these two grassy areas left. One is partially on solid ground and partially on the freeway cap, and the other one, which is this one, is completely on solid ground. I had originally planned to have both of these be dedicated solely to parkland, but taking a look at it now, I decided to divvy up some of it to be part of the park and some of it to be used for development. Mostly because the steep slope here is just a little bit easier to do when you can cover it up with buildings, but also because I thought it seemed like the kind of location that would be prime for at least some development. And parking lots that go alongside that, of course. So the original idea here was to have the whole park system be one continuous piece of land. I didn't want to completely abandon that, so if you can remember back a couple episodes when I added in this weird slip lane between these two roads, I'm going to take that and add a little pedestrian area alongside it so you can get between the two park areas still without having to walk up the hill and go along Main Street, because that would just be an annoying detour. This thing probably ends up looking a little bit too fancy for what is essentially a back alley alongside a massive sunken freeway, but oh well. This last plot of land is going to be quite different. So there's a public parking lot down here meant for people visiting the park. And then I thought it would be kind of interesting to have a single historic building here on the corner. I really liked the look of this one with the nice brick texture and the slightly rounded corner, but it was a bit too tall for this part of town. So I turned it into a PO and lowered it down to the ground, and I just had to come back and add in a couple of door props because obviously the built-in doors are now lowered deep into the ground. I didn't want anyone feeling too immersed in the historic architecture of the city, so I added a parking lot to the side as well, which I think actually looks kind of cool up here on its own little retaining wall. Then the rest of the block here along Main Street is a gentle enough slope that I'm able to have it be a bit more of a natural looking park with basically just some trees scattered about to make it look a little bit more inviting. Finally, this cat park is going to be extremely simple because I didn't want it to compete with the orchid garden. I wanted it to be a bit more plain and a bit more of kind of just the starting area for the park. If you do come to this parking lot and park here and then you walk around the rest of the park, this is just kind of your introduction to the whole thing. So I didn't want it to be too fancy. To make it, I'm just going to basically mimic the style of the pathways and the details of the cat park across the street that we built back in episode 10. And with that done, we are done with the park system. Of course, I'm sure there's going to be more to add on to this, at least in the Lake Walk Park along the shore in the very distant future, but that's not important right now. What is important is heading back to the neighborhood surrounding the interchange and building a bunch of stuff to serve people coming into town after a long drive down our new freeway from Canada. Unfortunately, there are no Tim Hortons available in this area, but I'm sure that they'll survive, eh? We're going to finish off this build by detailing the area around this intersection where the road that runs up from the interchange that we just built earlier meets Main Street. This isn't a big enough intersection to have a bunch of high-density shops pop up or anything like that, but I did think it warranted a bit more attention and a bit more of a unique style than just the usual single-family homes that make up most of the surroundings. So you have this bank that I had placed down last episode. I had to cut out the detailing phase of that because that would have added like 10 extra minutes to a video that is already turning out to be way too long, so sorry about omitting that. There's also this church on the corner, which I think has a style of architecture that looks straight out of Duluth, especially once I darken the brick color a bit, which I forgot to record myself doing, but you can see it over here in the corner. I just think that looks really nice. Across the street from that, I thought it would be interesting to switch it up a little bit and have a historic house instead of a service or shop of some kind. I'm going to spend a few extra seconds detailing this to make it feel a bit more grand because it is always on display to everyone passing through this intersection, so presumably the owners would pay a bit more attention to curb appeal. The final corner here is going to be totally different. I'd had this giant block earmarked for something with a bigger footprint for a while now, and I figured that this would be a good spot to plop down what is actually the city's first elementary school. I'm thinking historically this would have been a more recent construction, so maybe long ago there was a school that originally served the East End, and as demand increased, they tore that down, absorbed some of the adjacent properties into its bounds, and then built a newer, much bigger one in its place. Along, of course, with a nice parking lot and driveway system that kind of snakes around the building and down the hill. The slope here also necessitated an unholy amount of retaining walls, which I just made with IMT. So that's it for the building in this episode, but there is one more thing we have to do before we can claim victory over the East End. Over the last 4 and 29/35 videos, we've doubled the city's population and added a whole lot of services and stores without adding any kind of transportation, other than foot or car, and those are kind of boring. So to connect this area up with the rest of the city, we're going to extend and add in a couple of transit lines. I wanted to start off with something that's not public transit per se, but serves a similar purpose, which is a school bus route. To do that, I'm going to make a route that basically just meanders through the various neighborhoods we've made, including going all the way down to the area across the lift bridge. This isn't necessarily meant to represent an exact route, but mostly to get school buses moving around the city, which is something that honestly you really have to get that classic American look in a city, in my opinion. Next, I had to decide how I wanted to manage the streetcar line. So this purple line is the main one that runs along Main Street and even goes as far out to the southwest as the industrial zone. So it's a pretty important line overall. As you can see, I had originally planned to have it turn up the hillside here, and I was going to add in a new line heading further northeast along Main Street. But at the last second, I changed my mind because I realized that there just wasn't enough going on out here to warrant an uphill streetcar line. So I'm going to rip up those tracks, replace it with a normal avenue, and instead just take the purple line and continue it straight along Main Street, which we'll get to in a second. First, we're going to take care of this bus route, which runs from Union Station downtown over to the Brewery District. I thought that it was pretty obvious that I would just take this one and have it continue along the frontage road. That's kind of just a natural continuation of this route. The added bonus of doing it this way is that on its way eastward, it gets to use this little slip lane next to the overly fancy pedestrian path. And then on the way back, it stops at the community center, which is going to kind of become a mini transfer station where we have a few lines stopping. So with that sorted, we just need to add in streetcar stops at the community center on this purple line, over at the grocery store as well, and finally at the elementary school. I'm not sure yet if I want to keep our bus system as kind of these intersecting lines that just run along the main avenues, or if I want to have some kind of hub and spoke system. I'm sure the answer to that is going to crystallize at some point once we start filling in these surrounding areas and we can kind of get a sense of how all these things are going to fit together. But for now, I'm just going to put down a couple of new bus lines as reminders of where they're going to go. So the first of the two lines I'm adding is going to be this short one, which basically replaces the uphill streetcar line that I was originally going to put down. The second line is a long northeast-northwest line that primarily runs along this pair of one-way roads that go through downtown. It's probably a little close to the purple streetcar line that's parallel to it, but I just thought it was too tempting to have a bus line running along these one-way roads. It just seems really fitting for some reason. So with all that nonsense out of the way, we are done with transit lines, done with this video, and for the time being, done with the East End. I hope you enjoyed this run of builds, and I'm sure we're going to be back here soon enough to tack on some more modern suburban style developments and all that sort of stuff. But for now, I'm thinking next we'll probably head back to the port and finish that off with a few cool builds. Thank you to my channel members, with a special shout out to my $5 tier members, New and Victor Sellin. And thank you for watching. See ya. Now take off, you hoser.